Welcome to the Lovecraftian podcast, if we are indeed live. We are attempting to dual stream now to Facebook Live. So, Logan, are we live? I see waiting for Lovecraftian on my other screen. There it is. There it is. All right. Anyway, welcome to the Lovecraftian podcast. Hopefully we are live on Facebook too. Maybe you can send me a note and let me know. As always, let me know if you can hear us okay. And yeah, one small step for a man, one large step for Lovecraftian. That's Logan's joke. And our guest today is Matt Cardin. Hey, Matt.
You're muted.
You're not now. Matt's not saying anything. All right, well, that works. Perfect.
Okay.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Not too bad. Let's do introductions and then talk to Matt Cardin about his work, philosophy, especially the intersection of theology and horror, things like that. Why don't we start with Rick and go from there?
Rick Lay, writer and Pope collector.
Mike DeBronzo is here.
Yeah. Mike DeBronzo, architecture, artist, and Patreon.
And you're not in your basement.
Not today. Sorry,
Okay.
guys.
All right. Matt Carpenter.
Hi, everybody. I'm Matt. I run the Lovecraftian movie night. We do have a prize today, just so you know. There's a group of young poets of the weird and fantastic who are getting a little bit of notice. Adam Bolivar is a very nice young gentleman in this group. He had a Jack Napes Press book come out, The Ettenfell of Beacon Hill, which is Gothic Tales of Boston. If you want to win a paperback copy of this, just send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com and put Boston in the subject heading. We randomly draw a winner in like 5-6 weeks, and so it could be you.
This is a really good book. I blurbed it.
So in spite of that, if you want to win this book, just send an email.
Pete Rollick is here. I did not think Pete Rollick would be here. Pete Rollick is in a very bad mood. He will now explain why and tell the audience who he is. And remember, you have a lot more people watching today. You need to, show
Right.
show some presence, or just yell at me or do something. Yeah.
Okay. So the truth of the matter is that sometime before Christmas, one of my kids became sick.
Oh no.
And over the course of the last 2 weeks, it has ravaged my entire family.
COVID sick?
Only one person has tested positive for COVID. It has not been me.
Well, I can see why you're in a bad mood. That's
I have been sleeping on the couch.
but not
Same.
because of the illness stuff.
Yeah.
Because Mandy sent you there.
No, because the upstairs is for sick people and the downstairs is for the person who's actually functional. So
And then why are you down there?
because I'm
You want to tell the audience who you are, because maybe they might want to buy one of your books or something, and
People
then
are-
maybe even read it.
I write bad horror adventure novels. My
They're
latest,
good. You watch bad movies, but you don't.
I
write
watch bad
ones.
movies and then I make them into bad horror adventure novels. My latest is the Miskatonic University Spiritualism Club from Jack Napes Press. Available at all your finer internet outlets and some not so good.
Yes, if you're watching live or on Facebook or YouTube, I'm very happy about this. By the way, thank you to my son Logan. The link to Pete's book is in the show notes. If you're listening later on or watching later on, then the link is in the show notes. So you can click on that book. I also have a link to Matt Cardin's website. I thought it would be the professional thing to do since he's the guest, and link to his latest book, To Rouse Leviathan. So thanks for being here, Matt Cardin. We have 2 mics today and 2 Matts. So this is gonna
Only
get,
one Peter.
yeah. So anyway, thanks for being here. I don't think I've ever had you on the show before. So it's been a long time coming. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm well aware of it, so it's good to be here. I appreciate you having me.
were you bitter
Was I
that
bitter?
that I hadn't oh, okay.
No, not at all. These things are extremely stressful for me, so I'm actually bitter that you invited me.
Oh, all right. Well, we can
No, we just canceled the
cut it.
episode.
We can cut it short. No, Matt. I love Matt's work. I love Matt's nonfiction. Why don't we start with what would you, if someone said to you, I mean, there are many themes to your work, but if they said what are a couple of the main themes to your work, both fiction and nonfiction, what would be your response to that? Let's start with that.
I would say the first thing, this is free association, right? First thing that comes to mind is a rather desperate search for truth, inability not to be questioning the basis of everything, of reality, of personal identity, and sometimes inescapable suspicions or fears that the truth might be something that would be really awful to know.
For example, if there is a creator God, to really put it simply, maybe he's not a good guy, things like that.
Yeah, things like that. That actually occupied some space in my first collection of stories, Divinations of the Deep. Or if, in that, the metaphor that plays out in that book, which is plot-wise disconnected stories, thematically closely connected stories. The metaphor that plays out is that maybe God is not that great of a guy, or maybe God or gal, or whatever however you want to frame that,
Yeah.
or that is not self-aware enough to know that God is not really, God is conventionally conceived in Western religion is not the final word and is unaware of this. Sort of a quasi-Gnostic theme going on there. So yeah, that kind of thing. And also there's I've always just kind of had what a lot of people who are attracted to weird fiction have, sort of these intimations of eruptions of surreality, into daily experience. You know what I'm saying? The sense that things are getting weird and there's nothing to do about them, and maybe they're hinting towards some sort of unpleasant revelation. That's almost hackneyed for people who are into weird fiction, but that's really what attracted me to it and led me to write it.
Sorry if some of the people on live chat are saying your volume's a little bit low, so if you can speak up, that'd be great.
Yep, I'll bring it closer too. Is
Okay.
that any better right now?
It is for me.
Anybody else? Is it better for
Hopefully it
anybody
is
else?
for the people watching as well. That has always fascinated me, that idea that perhaps God is the offspring of something else. You explore this in your work. You explore, I guess let's start with Divinations of the Deep, because I think the first story was the writer's answer, and then the second story was the monk's answer. Am I remembering that correctly?
That's right.
And in your introduction, I love Kindle because I can highlight stuff. For a certain type of person, this all raises the question of whether God is truly the final power in the universe. Is it not possible to speculate still further that, am I saying this right, Tihom predates God? Talk about Tihom and the deep.
I was, by the way, am I still loud enough? I mean, for everybody at least here with me in the room? Okay. I hope all the listeners too.
Yeah, I think so.
Tihom is a Hebrew word, and it appears at the beginning of Genesis. And it's when, most people know the beginning. Most people know the opening lines in the King James version of the Bible, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void. And it says, the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters, and darkness covered the face of the deep. And the thing that's translated as the deep right there, that's Tihom. And I kind of explain in the preface to Divinations of the Deep that Tehom, meaning the deep, means in that context means like a primeval ocean of uncreated chaos. And in the Hebrew scriptures, it sort of represents something that was there, like that formless and void, pre-created primordial chaos that God organized into the world that we know. But there's been a lot of speculation throughout history about the possible relationship of that word Tehom as a cognate word to the Middle Eastern Babylonian chaos dragon Tiamat that we're all familiar with. And there's been a lot of speculation that maybe that represents sort of a buried, encoded reworking in Christian and Jewish scriptures of the ancient Babylonian chaos theology that had Tiamat as this primal chaos dragon being all that existed in the beginning. And then she had children who were the gods that a lot of these ancient peoples worshipped, and her children rebelled against her and had a war against her and killed her and made the universe from her carcass. And so Tehom may, if these linguistic speculations are right, may actually be the encoded survival of something like that into Christian and Jewish scripture, and elsewhere in the Hebrew scriptures, Leviathan and some other chaos dragons are explicitly referred to. So I have a very religious background. I was raised very evangelical Christian and went on to get a master's degree in religious studies. So I was also wrapped up with weird horror fiction for some of the same reasons. So, I started seeing some connections here with horror and really at the basis of Western, at least Judeo-Christian religion. Long answer, but that's maybe the beginning of a conversation.
Yeah, another highlight from your introduction. Eventually, inevitably, the great deep will rear its monstrous head and reveal to God and to us the true nature of our universe and ourselves. If memory serves, I also have a really religious background, and at one time, it would be very fair to say that I'd read the Bible a dozen times over and was an expert. For the last 30 years, I've tried to avoid it for the most part. So I'm going by memory, but I do remember the Old Testament that it seemed like towards the beginning, God is a jealous God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me, which kind of implies that there are other gods. And then later, it's like he morphs into the I am that I am. I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning of the end. Would you agree with that? Am I remembering that correctly?
Well, yeah, it's true. But the I am that I am actually occurs early on too. That's in Exodus. When God reveals his name to Moses at the burning bush instance.
Yeah.
So that's there all along. But it is true that the evolutionarily over the course of Jewish history, as reflected in the scriptures and so on, you have a little more universal aspect coming on. At first, he chooses this one tiny little group of people in history, and then it becomes more universal. You can see that happening in Isaiah and elsewhere. So that's definitely, and then by the time you get to Christianity, I mean, I know there's different ways of reading Christianity, but it's supposed to be a universal religion. Yeah, it really is. The whole Alpha and Omega thing, that's in New Testament.
Yeah. Revelation. As long as you keep speaking up, people are saying they can hear you just fine now. So thank you.
Good.
Tell me about, maybe, if it's all right with you, some of your background, your religious background, and then what began to happen to you, the kind of things that you began to think about, and the intersection between horror and theology, that it seemed like from reading your work, almost like a revelation to you, or an epiphany of sorts.
Yeah, the way I've said it before was that the thing that drew me to religion and made me take my childhood religion really, really seriously ended up being the same thing that made me fascinated with and inexorably drawn to horror fiction, and specifically cosmic and weird horror fiction. And I didn't realize that self-consciously until rather mid or late in the journey. But as I said, I was raised in an evangelical church, in the first Christian church in my hometown. And first Christian churches are, they're if they're the conservative, not the disciples of Christ type, they represent like the Restoration movement that started in the 18th and 19th centuries. The idea that New Testament Christianity, all stripped down without all these historical accretions, should be restored. So that was the tradition that I grew up in, and I was really serious about it. You know, I read my Bible and I prayed and I read the literature that the Sunday school teachers sent home, and I had this burning desire to know myself experientially and intellectually what this all was. You know, it was one of the, you know, when you're a kid, why do you do what you do, right? It comes out naturally. And so I really wasn't just content to go to church, be a Sunday Christian and whatnot. I went to a Sunday evening youth group, and I went to church camp in the summers and all that kind of thing. And throughout my adult life, actually, I've had a continued involvement in churches. I played the piano in bunches of Protestant churches for the past 25, 30 years. And I think when we were kind of just touching base, doing our tech check yesterday to make sure this worked, you know, I said I was originally in junior high and early high school, I was into high fantasy. So I was reading Tolkien and Lloyd Alexander and all this kind of stuff. And then that turned toward Lovecraft and weird fiction, late high school. I actually discovered Lovecraft through role playing. I read a book titled Dicing with Dragons that was kind of explaining this new craze of role playing games. And it mentioned the Call of Cthulhu game, and the description fascinated me. I ended up looking up Lovecraft. I think I actually read DeCamp's bio of Lovecraft that I got from a library in the county seat town near my hometown before I read any Lovecraft stories, or while I was reading Lovecraft's stories for the first time in those Ballantine paperbacks. And it was hitting the same notes that all the religious stuff was hitting. I mean, it was doing this thing that in some of the stories was really interrogating reality and saying things about what might be real behind the scenes of normal everyday perception. Like the music of Eric Zahn is almost an archetypal example of that, especially because it leaves it mysterious in the end. Over the years, I continued with my interest in religion. I got a master's degree in religious studies. I started reading Alan Watts. I got really interested in mystical religion, both Eastern and Western. And that's been a continued theme in my life, but the interest in weird horror fiction and cosmic horror fiction has continued as well. I discovered Legati after college, and this was all wrapped up together for me. I realized at some point, like, man, the same thing that is driving me in my religious and spiritual life, that I just am driven to know. You know, I want to know who I am and why I'm here and what the universe is and what powers may be ruling it and how that relates to me and my relationships with people and so on. Same thing when I went to read, and also when I went to write. I had a desire to write from the time I was a kid. You know, I wrote fantasy stories. I even wrote a whole fantasy novel when I was about 14. And when I turned towards weird horror fiction, it's like, this is actually a way of talking about the same things. That's what the major authors in the field are doing. So I wasn't just reading Lovecraft, I was reading some Blackwood and some of your classic names. And when I started to write, that's where it went as well. It's like, and I also had a really hard period after college where I just sort of had a difficult emotional, personal time owing to some psychological things that happened. We can talk about if you want, but my first story that I wrote as a mature story was Teeth, which was actually my first published story. It didn't appear in collection anyway until my second book, but it was sort of a fusion of all of these things: religion, philosophy, and this fear that maybe all this stuff leads to a bad place.
Yeah, the thing that the spiritual awakening that one might be searching for, when they find the answer, that it may not necessarily be a good thing. It may not be the answer that they're looking for. It may be something terrible.
That was the fear, yes.
Yeah, the title of an interview that I read online a while back, I got it in front of me. Matt Cardin, quote, "What drew me to religion was the same thing that drew me to horror." You and I talked about yesterday in our video test. I told you that people like horror for many different reasons, as you know. You know, some people enjoy slasher movies. I don't. I mean, I'm a big Scream fan, but other than that, I like quiet horror. I like horror that, as you say, examines the foundations of reality. What is real? What is not real? Philip K. Dick, you know, more sci-fi, but could be argued horror if reality is not what you think it is, and indeed if you are not who you think you are. So, you know, I guess what happened after that? I mean, did you stop going to church? I read in another interview something that to me was very refreshing. And I'm going by memory here, that belief is when one has beliefs, it's the death of intellectualism. Am I getting that quote sort of right?
Something like that, I think. Yeah, I think I was probably channeling Robert Anton Wilson when I said that.
Or Andrewen. I remember when Carl Sagan died, someone asked his wife, didn't Carl want to believe? And she said, no, Carl didn't want to believe, he wanted to know. And so is that where you stand continually, or how have you evolved from your faith growing up as a child?
The way I understand things now, and I mentioned before that I'd continued going to church, for a great many years.
And I should say, if I can interrupt you real quick, for the audience, the reason why I'm asking Matt these questions are really relevant to cosmic horror and Lovecraftian horror. Here's something I copied down from a Amazon review of Dark Awakenings. And the reviewer said, in Dark Awakenings, author and scholar Matt Cardin explores this ancient intersection between religion and horror in 7 stories and 3 academic papers that pose a series of disturbing questions. What if the spiritual awakening coveted by so many religious seekers is in fact the ultimate doom? What if the object of religious longing might prove to be the very heart of terror? And another review said, this is, which is really the one I wanted to get to, this is one of the rarest books I've found to date, aside from the rest of Cardin's work, which absolutely nails it on all levels. This author seems to truly understand what cosmic horror really is. And I'm very curious about how you've come to that place and what drove you to that place.
A large part of it has to do with sort of living on the edge of a continued sense that religious truth and what Western theology, Christian theology, has called the beatific vision, the final vision of blessedness and bliss and heaven and all that, is the way things really are, and one only has to discover that, or through a moment of grace receive it. And on the other hand, all those suspicions and intimations, like I've said, that things are worse than that, and that one is being sucker punched maybe by one's desire even to pursue these things. And I think for me, riding the edge between those, and mostly going towards the dark, actually exclusively towards the dark edge of it in the fiction that I've written, is what has kept me going. In terms of my personal journey with it, like I say, after college, I continued to go to church. I hadn't gone to church as an undergraduate, but I got married, got very involved in various churches with my family, and am very conversant with the current religious landscape in America, sociologically and in the Protestant world and so on, and intellectually, because as I say, I went on to get a master's degree in religious studies. At the same time, I was having some problems that arose in conjunction with sleep paralysis attacks. I've talked about this before in various contexts, that for some reason started happening to me right after college. And they were pretty devastating, especially the first few, and lasted for off and on for several years. This is in the early mid-90s. And
Matt, I've never experienced that, although of course I've heard and read about it. Can you talk about this and what makes it so devastating? Because it really sounds like it is.
Well, sleep paralysis, a lot of people know because it's more talked about now than it ever was in the past, is what happens when you come to partial waking consciousness while you're still in REM sleep and your body is paralyzed due to a sort of a shut off or a cut off mechanism that happens. It's assumed that it's so that we won't act out our dreams, and the opposite happens when you sleepwalk. right? You don't come to consciousness, but your body starts moving
Right.
and acting out your dreams. Sleep paralysis, a lot of people have experienced it now. It's worked its way into the contemporary horror genre in a big way. You know, that Rodney Asher film about shadow people that came out with the Nightmare. Is that what that was called? I can't remember. It was such a big deal.
I think so. Are you
It sort
talking
of
about
plays
the
a part in
documentary
paranormal
on Netflix or something?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
And it sort of plays a part in the Paranormal Activity movies. In fact, it was at the root of the horror genre and the supernatural horror genre from its inception. Because if you look at that famous painting, you know, of the little demon figure sitting on the woman who's fallen back into sleep, that's actually a depiction of the painter's own experiences with sleep paralysis from the late 18th century. And he was actually friends with Mary Shelley's mother, and Mary Shelley knew him and recreated that picture at one point in her novel Frankenstein through words. I mean, this has been part of the horror genre for a long time. I didn't know that. Never heard of sleep paralysis, and I started experiencing it. Some people with sleep paralysis just wake up, can't move, they're panicked, they feel like they're suffocating, and later on they remember it when they really wake up and go, wow, that was scary. Other people have hypnagogic visions that come up and can experience weird sounds, weird visual perceptions, weird physical perceptions. I had all of the above. I had a sense of being electrocuted in bed that some people talk about, weird hissing sounds in my ears, and most prominently what seemed to be a dark, glowing, sizzling with electricity, man-shaped, demonic type figure standing at the foot of my bed. And the first time it ever happened to me, it was just like a John Carpenter movie. He's done this in 2 movies, In the Mouth of Madness and Prince of Darkness. You wake up and think you're awake, but you're actually waking up into the nightmare. I woke up into this experience that was already happening and consciously reached this level where the dream was my bedroom, and there's this thing standing at the foot of the bed. And there's a sense of absolute terror, unbearable terror, not just from the thing, but just it's like part of the dream. A lot of people know this. And that happened. And my wife woke me up because I was trying to yell in bed, but couldn't. And I thought she was seeing the same figure I was seeing because she's hitting me, you know. And then I really woke up. Multiply that by several more times and several variations over a span of years. And I started having fears of losing my mind, and it started sort of darkening my whole mood in the day. And it was really like living in ways. It was like living in a weird horror movie because the sense was of this surreal reality broaching waking life. So that was a major ingredient in my starting to write horror instead of just having read it and imbibed it for so long.
That sounds absolutely terrifying, and to come out of that, I mean, I applaud you. That sounds like a horrible experience. Rick, this reminds me a bit of first episode of Evil. Is that what you were thinking just now?
Yes, I was.
Yeah, I figured you were. I don't know
Well,
if
I was thinking if I've experienced some of this myself, actually. Not continually like that, but at various points in my life. Right, once made you a joke. I had a dream that you visited me once in my sleep and wanted me to write bad reviews on Amazon. It was a dream.
Say
like
I did or somebody else?
It was you.
Oh God, what did I do?
It was a version of you. And I remember
This is the first time I'm hearing this.
I couldn't move. We talked about this years ago.
We did?
I
Okay.
couldn't move. And it was just some demonic version of you tempting me. It was a weird, very weird dream. And I've had different versions of that. I mean, without you, it's just the stranger in the house.
Yeah. This begs the question, is there a demonic version of me, or is it just me? What?
There is a demonic version of you. Yes.
Yeah. You've seen him.
Indentured to service every Sunday night, regardless of whether we want to be here or not.
Hey, I just send you the link. You don't have to click on it.
Oh, sure. Do you know what happens if we don't click on the link? You know.
You don't come to the show.
Well, no.
You don't come to that episode.
The nightmares, the visions, the pain.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that
Yeah.
too. That too. Of course, as anyone who watches this show on a regular basis knows that I enjoy reading Philip K. Dick, or I have in my life, and his nonfiction, and talking about sleep paralysis makes me think of something I'm going to badly paraphrase that Philip K. Dick said. The schizophrenic or the sleep paralysis person who's seeing something, is it manufactured by their mind, or are they seeing a different reality? And how would you really know the difference? How can you prove empirically either way?
That is that razor's edge, and that is part of what I was saying earlier about it plays right into the same field I was saying about suspicions, the question of whether or not if there is a final spiritual revelation to be had, is it wonderful or is it horrible? And the question of whether, you said whether the things a person experiences in sleep paralysis can be empirically proved, is what that leads to. Absolutely, that's part of the question. And for me, that actually is the whole part of the thing. For me, having those experiences fed into my later philosophical development as I read a lot more, was introduced to Philip K. Dick, felt a lot of kinship with him and the whole bizarre things that started to invade his life, and I read a lot of Robert Anton Wilson, and he's the guy who is most associated with developing the concept of chapel perilous, the term being drawn from Arthurian legend, but he used it to refer to that state on the magical quest, magic with a K, ritual magic, where it seems that a person is perhaps being guided along by some sort of external higher power. Various occult traditions would call this the holy guardian angel. Others would call it something else. But person can't be sure. Maybe everything is just coincidence. Maybe everything is just your perception. Maybe it's really happening. All of this points to the fact that you are stuck in your own subjectivity. And
right.
So you can't know. And most of us would agree with that, but then still have this model that Western culture has given us, where we still go, yeah, but I know actually those things are just imaginary because I'm this little speck in a giant material universe. No, you can't know. And things like sleep paralysis foreground that. The guy who wrote the first modern major book on it was a cultural anthropologist and a folklorist who did a study of people who had experienced it in, I believe it was Newfoundland, because there was the old hag tradition there. And he found out that people who'd never heard of it, young people who'd never heard of it, were experiencing it at about the same rate as older people who'd heard the cultural stories. So it wasn't like they were being primed by their culture for this to happen to them. They would see the old hag too. What does that do for your sense of reality? And he developed what he subtitled his book, An Experience-Centered Study of Supernatural Assault Traditions. And he made that like a whole methodology, saying we're not going to go beyond the bounds of experience. We're not going to comment on whether or not this is or is not happening. We're saying nobody can step outside their own experience. You can reasonably, without departing from rationality, have your first principles be the experience you've had and develop a supernatural explanation. You can also develop a completely materialistic explanation that explains it away, but both of them would not miss a beat.
Well, and as I told a friend a long time ago, it sticks out in my mind because he thanked me and said it was such an epiphany for him. I said, Larry, it's okay to say, I don't know. You don't have to come up with an answer. Whatever you're talking about, if it can't be subjectively proved, it's okay to say, I don't know. And then, of course, if you boil everything you're talking about all the way down, then you get the solicism, right? So I feel kind of this is the first time I've quote unquote met you in person, but I feel a bit of a kinship with your journey, and then reading in interviews your reading journey, and reading things like you said, Ray Bradbury was a god to me. And I just consumed those huge Ray Bradbury, 100 Ray Bradbury stories, went through each one and I found as many as I could. And then you mentioned A Wrinkle in Time and its sequels. And the sequel to, or the companion book, whatever you want to call it, to A Wrinkle in Time, actually brought a swiftly tilting planet, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. I still get chills if you remember that scene where they're at the they're sitting around the table for Thanksgiving, and Meg's mother-in-law comes over and she starts speaking that rune, and the fire blazes and everything, and there's no explanation for it, but I probably read that book 10 times just because I get chills each time I read it. So
I read the exact same paperback edition that you have in your hand with that.
really,
Yeah.
I'm glad I grabbed that one then, because I actually have two in case I want to read it twice. So what about, I haven't read this. I think you wrote a paper on this and I haven't read it, but offering a reading of the book of Isaiah as a kind of Lovecraftian horror story. Of course, the book of Isaiah is a lot about the captivity of the Jews in Babylonia, if I remember right. How is this? How can this be construed as a Lovecraftian horror story?
Short version, if you do what I did in this paper, which I actually wrote for my master's degree. I was in a seminar class taught by Dr. Victor Matthews at Missouri State University. He's a major Old Testament scholar, and a lot of the textbooks you might get for Old Testament studies would come from him.
Okay.
Had a whole seminar on the book of Isaiah. And yes, it was about plugging into the cultural backgrounds of Isaiah and reading the text closely, understanding where it was coming from. Like you said, the book of Isaiah largely represents an ancient response to the invasion of the ancient Jewish home. They weren't even really Jewish yet; they were Israelites, and
Right.
and they're being carted off into their Babylonian captivity, which was such a formative part of the Jewish experience.
If
And,
I forget the old Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its cunning.
Exactly. And the thing is, I began to notice, and it was the same thing that was leading me to notice that one could write about religious themes in supernatural horror stories, weird and cosmic supernatural horror stories that tried to see there's really something that can be horrifying coming through in religion, Christianity, and others. That very book I was reading in the class and noticing, man, there's all this, there are these major scenes and sections of bloodshed and violence and horrible apocalyptic imagery, horrifying stuff. And these things are being done by Yahweh, they're supposed to be punishment of sinful peoples, but they're still just apocalyptic and bloody apocalyptic. Many people are familiar with the kind of imagery I'm talking about in the passages from the Old Testament and Isaiah that I'm talking about.
No, that was precisely an apocalypse for the Israelites.
It was exactly, and then you have this apocalyptic imagery that's being put into the book, which is divided into 3 or 4 sections. Actually, like first Isaiah, second Isaiah. That's recognized now. There are sections to the book.
Right.
You have all these things happening in a way that can look like a trail of breadcrumbs or clues to say, well, wait a minute, maybe the God who is doing this isn't exactly what he's being billed as on the top level of the text. Maybe you can flip things, and maybe you can see that he's in a way toying with people. And the reading that I finally came up with said, look, Leviathan and other chaos dragons are referred to in this text. Israel is supposed to be Yahweh's chosen people. But in a way, it kind of looks like if you want to put on these glasses and read this inverted version, that he's destroying all their enemies so he can save his people for himself, so that they can kind of be awestruck at his horrific majesty for all of eternity.
Well, yeah, and you have
cosmos. He's the one in Isaiah who is undoing things. He's the one the world is melting before. It's like, that sounds like the chaos dragons. That sounds like their job.
It does, and you have scriptural texts that say, or they say, "Happy shall he be." It's the Israelites saying this. One would assume that their God is okay with this. Happy shall he be who takes thy little ones and dashes them against the stones. I mean, when you're talking about grabbing a baby by its legs and banging its brains out against a stone wall. That's pretty graphic. And I'm gonna say wrong.
Well, it is, and it's also something that was done to the ancient Israelites and to their children by many of the people who conquered them. So
Yeah.
you even get, I think there's a psalm that talks about, the desire to do this to the other peoples. It's kind of like, you did this to us, we're going to do this to you. That's all there.
Right.
And when you get deep into it, you see that, well, modern notions of what a deity should be like are really thrown into some disarray when you kind of remove your original context and let some of these things speak to you, like in Isaiah, and go, I can actually see this with just the slightest tweak of vision as being a thing where Yahweh is the monster, especially in light of 66:24, the last verse of the book, chapter 66, verse 24. I make a big deal out of that in the paper, where I point out this is supposed to be in the new paradise. The day of Yahweh has happened. The enemies are all destroyed. Everyone's all happy here. And the last verse says, and they, meaning his people now living with him in his world, will go out, the implications like outside the city, and look at the corpses of those who rebelled against Yahweh, whose worm never dies and whose fire is never quenched. The idea,
yeah, that's some Lovecraftian imagery right there. Yeah.
This eternal putrefaction by worms and divine flame of these people that had opposed Yahweh, and it's like this almost holy duty of his people in their paradise to go look at that. That's where the book ends. That even bothered ancient readers. Rabbis used to instruct that when you read this aloud in the synagogue, you had to go back and read verse 23 again, so that you didn't end on that note. So I was looking at the book as given and its content and saying there are all kinds of clues you can use to use a reader response approach, where you focus on how this text affects you as a reader. Say, for me as a reader, I see all kinds of linkages with the cosmic horror that I had become very knowledgeable about by the time I was in grad school.
Pete, is it time for an angel quote yet?
I mean, if you want to, that's your thing, not mine.
Yeah, I just want to make sure it's okay with you. Illyria, an ancient one in season 5 of Angel, she's lecturing Angel, and she says, you're slave to a insane construct. You are moral. A true ruler is as moral as a hurricane, empty but for the force of his veil, which I didn't come here planning to quote that, but what you just said made me think of it. I'm also thinking of Stephen King's book. What's the one with the lightning, Pete, Rick? Can't remember.
Revival.
Thank you. Have you read that one, Matt Cardin?
I have. I just read it last year.
So you know how horrific the ending is, and that the ultimate answer, exactly what you're talking about, is about the worst thing that you can imagine. And no one is exempt. No matter what a good person they are, no matter what a horrible person they are, nobody's exempt. They're all judged exactly the same way. So
that was for me, that was an interesting moment in King's literary odyssey. I have not read everything he wrote by far. It has always been my favorite. I thought he really managed the almost impossible feat of writing a Lovecraftian story that could be expanded to that gargantuan length and still work all the way through. But when I read Revival, I thought, wow, that's an unusually bleak metaphysical background for him to go for. I was rather impressed.
I don't know him personally, but I read in an interview that someone asked him about it, like 6 months later, and he said, I don't want to talk about that book anymore. That book scares the hell out of me, because of that ending. And I actually read it when I was really sick with some just horrible flu. So I'm sure you guys have experienced this when that kind of thing hits you much harder than when you're in good health and you're just reading a book and you can say, okay, this is fiction, and put it aside. I'm not one to have nightmares over fiction, but combined with the flu, I had nightmares about that Stephen King ending all week. So, what if the ultimate truth is something that's just so horrible? You and I, yeah, Pete, please.
So Matt, you've talked about how
Yeah, and I have to apologize. John Langan is here, so forgive me
God,
for. Yeah.
he snuck in.
He snuck in and he's muted, but that's good. Oh,
I
God damn it, he unmuted.
Hey, Matt, I was like, hey, I'm going to tune in for the cheery episode of the Lovecraft e-zine, and then
Oh yeah,
okay, yeah,
yeah. We're all gonna, yeah,
yeah,
sing Kumbaya after this.
excellent.
Great to see you, John. Great to see you.
Pete,
All right, let's flip it around. Let's look at the biblical parallels in Lovecraft's work. There's a sense that the Dunwich Horror is a rewrite of the crucifixion of Jesus. And when you analyze the names that are used in The Shadow over Innsmouth and the thing on the doorstep, there are huge connotations and parallels to the biblical, because they are all biblical names, but they're all related and they kind of give you hints about the stories. What are your feelings on that?
Oh, I
Those
think
ideas.
the idea that the climax of the Dunwich Horror is
Yeah.
actually his own sort of transmutation.
Yes.
The crucifixion scene. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it seems transparent to me. You know, when you have this horrific monster that's finally been loosed upon the countryside on top of a hill shouting "Father," and there with the various other clues that have happened. Yeah, you don't have to look very far and see Jesus, you know, Father, why have you forsaken me? All that kind of thing from the cross. And like you said, you have the various biblical names in The Shadow over Innsmouth. Now, everybody knows, of course, he was the consummate antiquarian, and he was New Englander's New Englander. So, of course, when he uses various biblical names, I think he's drawing on the tradition, like for people, I mean, he's
Right.
drawing on the actual historical tradition of the way people were named in New England for so long, right? And I think he was that fascinating paradox, somebody who, maybe not a paradox, but it seems to me to be a rarity. He was somebody whose atheism and materialism were so real. I mean, they were not opposed. That was absolutely real. But he had this innate longing for, not for horror, for beauty and wonder. And you see that with all his writings about sunsets and, you know, the slanting roofs of New England, and the desire. In his letters, he wrote endlessly about the desire to escape the fetters of time and space and matter and be able to get this absolute transcendent view of reality. He was really, really sensitive to the things that draw many people to religion, and they're also related to a lot of appreciation of certain types of music and creative arts. I guess he wasn't that musically appreciative, but you know, he had this really developed, you might say, spiritual side, but he only got at it through literature for the most part.
There's
So,
that ending of The Shadow over Innsmouth. I will dwell in wonder and glory forever.
Mhm.
yeah, the only happy ending he ever wrote, and he uses quasi-biblical language there, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he had this desire for transcendence that his rational mind wouldn't let him accept, because this is a mechanistic universe that's only grinding on aimlessly, and we're just these little blips that unfortunately are conscious of it, you know. And so the fact that he was raised in the environment he was, in the time period he was, and all that, and had those inclinations, I think inevitably certain aspects of that would leak over into his writing. It's the same thing with his fascination with actually studying a little bit about occult rituals and such, and occult terminology, and bringing that into his stories.
One of the things that we have to remember too in his time, I think we talked about this the other day, Pete, that really all that was really known was the Milky Way, this one island universe. You know, we learned so much from 1900 to 2000, you know, about the universe, not just relativity and all that, but just how large the universe is. You know, I wonder how much further he would have gone knowing things like that. You know, I mean, not that the Milky Way isn't big enough, but it again is just a blip in the universe. I don't know. I think that, you know, am I interested in astronomy? Am I interested in religion? Am I interested in cosmic horror and everything, to me, they're just all elements of the same thing. This searching for, as you said in our video test, the foundations of reality and what is real, what isn't real. Wanted to ask you, how do you feel today if somebody comes up to you, not that many people would, but if they did and said, "Hey, Matt, what are you a Christian? Are you a believer of any religion? Are you an agnostic? Are you an atheist?" Is it too personal to ask you what your answer would be?
No, that's perfectly fine. And the answer is, yeah, I'm a Christian. I'm a non-dual Christian. And I'm, although I've never formally practiced Zen, I've been deeply influenced by what I've read about Zen and some Zen Buddhists that I've known, you know. So that's actually a field, Zen Christian, you know, the Zen Christian. There's been a dialogue going on between Buddhism and Christianity for a long time, and specifically between Zen and Christianity for a long time. So I'm in that vein, and also have that's inflected by the fact that the Jungian psychology, the Jungian view of things, the archetypal psychological view of things, that like James Hillman also pursued. Remember, he wrote The Soul's Code, talking about he resurrected the ancient metaphor of the daimon, the guiding spirit that the Greeks talked about, that has your life blueprint that the gods give you. That kind of thing as a metaphor attracts me. So I'm a Zen Christian archetypal psychology with generous leanings toward the paranormal and an ongoing interest in skepticism guy. So that's like a mouthful. It's a whole patchwork thing, but yes, I am.
And that's fine. I'm just trying to reconcile that with your statement that you don't want to believe anything, you want to know. Paraphrasing.
Religion as belief means that you say you hold these certain doctrinal beliefs about reality, however those are framed, right?
Right.
I think there are Buddhists who are believer Buddhists. You know, there are Muslims who are believer Muslims. There are Jews and Christians who are believers, and there's a place for that. That's fine, but that, to me, belief falls entirely in the realm of culture and history and sociology and linguistics and psychology, and belief is always historically conditioned. It's always something that actually can be explained, I think, and in some ways explained away. Like if someone says they believe such and such doctrinal point and they're a Southern Baptist, you could get into conversation with them, and if you're knowledgeable enough, you could show them the evolution of that belief and probably show them, at least in terms of cultural influences, why they believe that, where that came from. That kind of explains it away, if you can explain it in terms of history and language and sociology and all this kind of stuff. So there's that. The other side is what I was talking about earlier. None of us actually can step outside ourselves, can step outside this first person experience we're having right now and make absolute statements about things. And that mystery right there, if you're always staring outward from behind your eyes, any attempt to try and look back and locate yourself objectively somehow and say, I know where all these beliefs came from. I know that I'm just a speck in the cosmos, or I know that there is a God who loves me and whatever. At some point, you are not being honest. You're not staying with the reality of your first person experience. And it's in the mystery of this thing where you can't explain away yourself, the explainer. You can't observe away yourself, the observer. Not and remain true to your own self. That is where not belief religion comes in. That's where actual knowledge religion comes in.
Well, this is a compliment when I say this, but you're not easily labeled. If I had to stick a label on you, which I don't believe in doing to people, it would be, if I'm hearing you right, that is, that you're a Christian sort of agnostic. But tell me if I'm right or wrong or anywhere near when I think that.
Agnostic in terms of anything, the reality of any objective statements one could make about reality.
Yeah.
Not agnostic in terms of the first person knowledge of my own being that is just there and is just given, not as something I know about, but as something that I am. It's the same thing that you guys all share.
Yeah.
There's a whole field of non-dual spirituality that's actually becoming much more top line been much more prominent the past 20 years. There's YouTube videos galore with people like Rupert Spira talking about this, and there's the whole Eckhart Tolle phenomenon and so on. It's weird how it's being talked about a lot in modern technological countries. And that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Robert Anton Wilson was really good at putting a sort of pop culture spin onto this. And talking about the Fnord, and we are all popes, and you are all sons of God. But and of course he was, he edited Playboy magazine for what, 7 years, something like that. He understood. Yeah. So, and they, a couple of weeks ago we were talking about what book made a difference in your life, and the Illuminatus trilogy is the one I mentioned because it's an important book to understanding perception and reality, and it's a nice entryway into that.
And I agree with that, by the way. And I could name about 7 or 8 books by him that I could not rank one above the other, that were just foundational in my philosophical, intellectual, and otherwise development. There's Illuminatus, there's Schrodinger's Cat trilogy, there's the historical Illuminatus trilogy, there's Prometheus Rising, there's these various, the Cosmic Trigger, obviously the first one. And he talked about having gone through those states where remember how he described in Cosmic Trigger how he fell into a state for some time, I think it was in his 30s, where he was convinced he was receiving telepathic transmissions from the dog star Sirius. And it seemed for all the world real to him, and then he came out of that. And that was part of this weird Phil K. Dick type period that he went through. He knew Philip Dick, they'd been together some, that he was like, okay, what's real, what's not? Am I having these experiences or not? And he referred to it as a model agnosticism. That was his final point. Absolute unknowing in terms of objective truth statements about things. There's that Chapel Perilous again. Was I receiving telepathic transmissions from Sirius? Was there really a holy guardian angel? He was a member of various occult traditions, and he'd experienced contacting his holy guardian angel. Was that real? Can you explain it all the way in terms of psychology, neurology, whatever? He was like, absolutely refused to label any of it. Live in the middle of the possibility on all sides. And I completely agree with that.
John, all kidding aside, it's great to see you. John Langan is here for those who are listening later and can't see him. Do you want to hit Matt Cardin with some questions, or just listen to his wisdom?
Well, I'm enjoying listening to his wisdom, but and I had read. I was pleased to be able to read an advanced copy of his nonfiction collection, which is just amazing. And if you don't have a copy of it, Matt, it is available, right? Or has it?
No, actually, public. I think it's a bit delayed from what it was originally planned to be. It's titled. Help me with what's the title? I'm drawing. It's What the Demon Said. DAEMON. Subtitled.
That sounds right.
On horror, fiction, film, and philosophy, and I think Spring Hippocampus Press is when it's.
Yeah. So Hippocampus is okay. I'm gonna ask Derek to send me one.
So yeah, pre-order a copy of this, because it's just, there was, man, this is like a full meal. I mean, this is not like a little snack bar or something like that. I mean, this is like a full, 5-course meal with generous drinks on the side. There's just so much in there. So look, my question, like, you deal with Leviathan and as you said, the sort of the chaos monsters, and one of the things that fascinates me is the way in which you see, I think, remnants from older Near Eastern traditions that are sort of amalgamating into first Judaism and then ultimately after that into Christianity. So where does a monster like the behemoth fit into this? That's just a particular obsession I have at the minute. So I just wanted to see what if that's something you've thought about, or do you see that as just another chaos dragon? Because it seems to function in different ways to me than, say, like Leviathan does. But I thought I would just, kick that out there.
At the minute, I think you've had this obsession for a while.
It's been about 6 months, maybe, something like that. Which, is a little while, especially when, like you, Mike, if you're as close to death. I mean, that's,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, are you writing about that, John? Is that some research that you're doing right now?
It's entirely possible. I'm picking your brain right now, Matt. Yeah.
Okay. I don't have anything of really of value to offer because I've never really thought that much about Behemoth. I mean, I don't know, this may be patronizing. Everybody may know this already, but for those listening who are watching who don't know, Behemoth is another variety of monster that appears in the Hebrew scriptures, is mentioned in particular in the book of Job. And when God has this final gigantic tirade speech, Yahweh goes on this gigantic speech to put Job in his place and say,
Yeah, where were you when I did this and that?
Where were you when I formed the foundations of the world? You know, have
Who
you
the hell do you
seen
think
where
you are?
Who do you think? Have you seen where the oceans are stored? Have you seen beyond the mountain? And at one point he mentions the creatures Behemoth and Leviathan, and basically is saying, can you have anything to do with these? You look how amazing and awesome and terrifying these are. Did you make these? And I think maybe a reductionistic reading of it has that some commentators have wanted to say, well, Behemoth probably referred as like a code word for a hippopotamus, and Leviathan was probably actually a crocodile. And so this was sort of the mythologization of these real world creatures that seemed so impressive to people at the time that was written and received. I don't know. I tend to look at it more in terms of actual the way Leviathan is described there is very dragon-like. You know, really explicitly, there are things that crocodiles don't do that are ascribed to Leviathan, and probably to Behemoth as well. So I think it represents something fascinating and something like some monstrous something that obviously, at least in that part of the Hebrew scriptural tradition, was in the cosmos as conceived by the ancient pre-Jewish Israelite people. But I myself haven't really delved into that all that much. You probably know a lot more about it than I do at this point.
No, just that you're right that it's a strange creature that in comparison to the Leviathan, God doesn't spend that much time talking about it, but says in essence, you know, I can approach this thing with my sword. So it's as if it's something that, you know, it's a little bit of braggadocio on God's part, you know, unlike the Leviathan, which he's hooked and he's bound, and there's that sense of, you know, all those stories in which different kinds of monsters associated with the sea are either bound or killed outright. This is something a bit different. You know, this is something that has a gigantic tail. Which is because I've read the hippo things, you know, and I thought, well, hippos are certainly, you know, they kill more people in the continent of Africa than any other animal every year. So they're fearsome enough, but not so much on the tail department. So this thing has this giant tail, and yet, and it lies down or under some tree or another. And it's just this weird kind of creature. There's a German tradition, and I don't know where this comes from, that once a year the Leviathan bellows. And at its bellow, all the animals in the world fall silent. And it just seems to sort of keep them in place, you know, just, hey, knock it off, everybody. So it's just this, it's as with Leviathan, you know, with Leviathan, it seems to be so much easier to bring it back to Tiamat's, to those kinds of figures. Whereas the Leviathan, or the Behemoth, excuse me, just seems like this weird, you know, walking mountain of a thing. So yeah, what exactly it is, it's another instance of God's power, but in a way where he almost seems a little bit himself intimidated by it. You know, I'm brave enough to approach it as long as I've got my sword with me. And there's something very weird in that.
You know what I think? I think that whatever ends up coming from you on that, I want to see it.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you. That's very kind.
You know, John, that there's a horribly written pulp story from the 1920s called The Skirt of Behemoth by Bertram Russell, which is loosely tied to Cthulhu Mythos.
Nice. I did not know that, but thank you, Rick.
Is that
Tales of the Lovecraft Mythos?
Yeah.
Edited by Robin and Price.
You know, growing up, and I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, that this was the same for you, that God is the ultimate power in the universe. He's the creator. Everything springs from him. Satan may battle him and win some battles, but you know, the sense that you always get is that any win that Satan has, God's pretty much allowing it because Satan's his son and he's not as powerful as God. What fascinates me more, as you mentioned, Gnosticism, is the fact that, or not the fact, excuse me, but the idea that that may not be. God may not have been the originator of everything. You know, he's the offspring of the deep, possibly, as you mentioned in your writings. And in a Lovecraftian context, he can be defeated and his entire creation destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And that's like you said, the thing that was going on that sort of coded its way through the stories in Divinations of the Deep was that idea, yes, that maybe God, the God of conventional front-facing Christian theology is this mask, or is the demiurge of Gnosticism, of classic second century Gnosticism, who was a pretender God, wasn't the real final authority, you know, created the world we're in, which is all faulty and messed up because he's not really God. And then he kind of forgot that he did it. So he's basically the embodiment of ego, but he's separate from Satan, which is bizarre. That fascinated me, and I didn't realize, it's kind of like the ideas that I put into those stories and that preface for that book sort of revealed themselves over time. You know, like I didn't realize I was thinking that until I wrote it. It's kind of, I think a lot of writers have that experience. The thing for me, kind of where I've gone since then, is the idea that in the last story in Divinations of the Deep, Judas of the Infinite, you know, this guy has a mental conversation with God who approaches him, you recall, and had left a religious order because he thought he had discovered something inside himself in meditation that was older than God, that would kill God. And the God who comes and talks to him in this mental space conversation doesn't buy it, you know, and goes ahead and enters the guy for oneness with him, and then dies because he's sucked through this thing that he didn't know existed in this guy's soul. And it's, you know, it's kind of the idea that, and the darkness wins. There really was something older than God. But where I've gone in my own sort of personal life, I don't know that this is tracked in my fiction though, is that that if God is a facade, and that's the God of belief. We were talking about whether I don't really believe in belief, you know, don't adhere to that.
he's the Wizard of
reality
Oz,
beyond
basically.
That. Say that again.
He's the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, he's basically the Wizard of Oz, exactly. Or he's not the wizard, he's the face that the wizard is operating, right?
Right.
Reality itself, though, which struck me as possibly being so horrible over time, now strikes me as just reality. And whatever is horrible about it is just a function of distortions in our own perception. So, but I mean, whatever is conventionally wonderful about it is a result of distortions in our perception as well. It's just a matter of, it just is what it is. It's kind of where I've gone, and that's one reason why I'm not writing a lot of horror fiction lately, because some of the engine that drove that hasn't fallen apart. It's just kind of gone to sleep.
Said what you needed to say for a while on that particular. Yeah. Have you read, it struck me when I was reading The Monk's Answer, where he at first doesn't want to write down these quote unquote blasphemous things. And then he just has to. It's almost too wearying not to. And I thought of the passage in Jeremiah where Jeremiah says, I said, I will not make mention of him or speak anymore in his name. But his word was in my heart as a burning fire shut up in my bones. And I was weary with forbearing and I could not stay. In other words, Jeremiah is saying, just like the character in your story is, I can't not talk about this. I can't not write about this. It's too powerful.
Right. And notice in the story, notice the metaphor going on though. What's happening is that monk is in a scriptorium, you know, in a monastery, and he's tasked with copying the scriptures, and he starts seeing things between the lines, another scripture between the lines of the scripture that he's copying.
Right.
And that starts becoming the book that he's writing. And of course, his fellow monks are absolutely horrified when they find out about it. So that's kind of how I was feeling when I wrote that, is that I was seeing this thing that other people weren't seeing. And in the circles I was moving in the churches I was moving in, people would be absolutely horrified if they had
Oh,
known
yeah.
that I was seeing, but seeing and thinking these horrific things was always kind of in a hyperspace. You know, I was, like as I say, I was on that edge, never buying into any side of it.
Well, we've talked a lot with you today. I really want to say to the audience that it's a great conversation, and I think even perhaps better experience is reading Matt's fiction and nonfiction. Divinations of the Deep is $70 on Amazon, but you can get it for $5.99 on Kindle, so you can read it. Your newest book is To Rouse Leviathan. Will you talk about that one for a minute?
Yeah, that came out in 2019, and it actually contains the complete contents of Divinations of the Deep. It's an omnibus collection, so it collects my previous two collections, all the stories.
Well, that's good to know, because it's on Kindle Unlimited as well.
Okay, and
Yeah.
then my second book was
There you go,
there
Pete.
you go. There's
Yeah.
Steve with a copy. Thank you. My second book was Dark Awakenings, which was several stories, and then several you read about it earlier, right? Several free nonfiction works about the religion horror nexus. To Rouse Leviathan collects the stories from Dark Awakenings, which are more in the same vein, and some go elsewhere. They don't all track exclusively the religion horror thing, but a lot of them do. And then there's a final section in To Rouse Leviathan of previously uncollected work that had appeared elsewhere.
And then Matt has one of your books that he's going to be mailing to me. You want to show us that book, Matt? Mike Carpenter, I mean, in this sense.
Sure. Okay. This is going back into like 20 years in the past almost. It was a company called Delirium Press.
When you were only, what, 65 or 70 at the
Right,
time?
thanks.
Yeah.
So what they published was a collection of 6 essentially novellas, I don't know. And Matt Cardin's book, The God of Foulness, was one of the stories. Now, I believe this has been collected in some other anthologies by now. So it's not that you can't get a hold of it, because this would be, you aren't going to find this except by chance on the open market.
Yeah, it was incredibly pricey the last time I had them.
Well, your name's Matt. What you could do is just sign this, Matt, and mail it to.
I always sign the books I mail out.
Oh, okay.
People want signed copies.
Whether you've written them or not, I know.
Right, they want signed copies. They didn't specify. At any rate,
that's on them. You're right.
What is fascinating to me about this is, what if disease is a manifestation of the Godhead? You know, and to approach the divine, you need to become diseased. So, you know, maybe the lepers got it going on. It's really a beautifully written story. So I think it's in a couple other anthologies, but I don't remember what.
It's actually in To Rouse Leviathan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Worth it to pick up for this story.
Yeah.
It's very different than the other mythos stories you might read, or mythos isn't fair, cosmic horror.
Yeah. Okay. So To Rouse Leviathan came out from Hippocampus, Derek Hussey, and your next nonfiction book is coming out from Hippocampus as well. Is that right?
Yep. And it's kind of the same. It's very much the same as To Rouse Leviathan, which was rounded up about 20 years worth of my, actually all but 1 or 2 stories of my published fiction. And then the new book, which is titled, as I said, What the Demon Said, does the same thing for 20 years worth of essays and introductions to work by other authors. You know, I wrote the introduction to John Paget's The Secret of Ventriloquism.
Yeah, he's watching right now, by the way, Matt.
Okay. Well, hi, John. John's been one of the pillar presences in my adult post-college life, not just in this area, but just as a friend.
John, The Secret of Ventriloquism is one of the really scariest books you'll ever read. Truly.
100%. 100%. Also consummately written, so it's fantastic. I wrote the introduction to the book. I've written introductions to books by Simon Stranzas and by Joel Pulver, and the book includes those. And I've written a bunch of essays about Legati over the years. I kind of became known for a while as the guy who interpreted Legati, you know. So it collects all of my Legati essays beginning in 2001 or 2 all the way up to 2019.
Does that include, didn't you recently in the last few years come out with a book of interviews? You edited a book of interviews with
It was
Legati?
titled Born to Fear, Interviews with Thomas Legati, and it collected interviews from across his career. I think it was published in 2015. And
he
it's kind of like a
emailed
companion.
me about 2 years ago, or maybe I have the date wrong, asking me if he could include, John, you'll remember this, John Langan. I wanted to interview Thomas Legati. He didn't want to do an interview like this, but a text interview, email interview he was fine with. And then I thought, you know, I'm being selfish. I want to reach out to a bunch of different people and have them ask, you know, one question each of Legati. John, I believe you asked a question. I know Ramsey did, Joe Pulver did, several people did, and it was a really, it's free to read at Lovecraft Easy, and just use the search bar on the top right. But I know Tom emailed me and asked me if he could include it in some interview book, but I wasn't sure if that was it or not. Sounds like it might have been a little early.
Or was that a while back?
I think it's been about 5 years.
Okay. Probably that may have been it. No, I don't know. There was another book that came out from Borderlands Press. I think it was titled The Little White Book of Screams and Whispers. And I have that somewhere here, but not in the room. And it was another book of interviews with him, very small, very, you know, very limited edition.
Oh, here it is. I got his email in front of me. Hi, Mike. I'm putting together a small collection of previously uncollected interviews to be published in an edition of 300. I don't know what 300 is. With your permission, I'd like to include the interview from Lovecraft Easing. And of course, I told him that's totally fine. But that's dated May the 28th, 2018. So that'd be 3 years past your
That'll
book.
be that Little White Book of Screams and Whispers, which is worth it.
Oh, okay.
Plus mine, the Born to Fear, those together basically serve as
Who published the Screams and
complements to
Whispers?
his fiction.
Who published the Screams and Whispers that Tom was talking about?
Tom Monteleone, Borderlands Press.
If I can comment, they have
God damn it, he owes me a copy.
they have a series of books. It's called the Little Book series, and they're on like series 4 now. And they're like 15, 20 books in each series. And it was one of those books. It was one of the Little Book series.
They are so cool, all kidding aside. Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, you were saying your upcoming book is a nonfiction, and the title again is
What the Demon Said.
And does Derek have a date for that yet?
Not a specific one, but I recently got soft confirmation that this spring is when it's coming out.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
It
I look forward to
ends
reading
with
that.
several interviews with me, by the way, so that gets really personal in some of those final pieces in it.
Okay. Well, I can just say the audience, I'm sure that many watching, listening are aware of who Matt Cardin is. He's been around in the cosmic horror, weird fiction community for quite a long time now. But if you're not, or if you know his name, but you haven't delved into his work yet, as a fan of cosmic horror, Lovecraftian fiction, you really, really should. Maybe start with To Rouse Leviathan and go from there. That's my thought. What about you, Matt?
That would be the one if they want to see virtually all of my fiction in one place. And
Okay.
pretty soon they're going to have a book to see virtually all of my nonfiction in one place. Plus, I've got various editorial projects like that, like Born to Fear, that my introduction to it might be of interest, but that's going to appear in What the Demon Said. So those two books may provide a nice summation.
I don't want to keep you too much longer, but you and I on our video test, we talked about stories. I alluded to this earlier about people like horror for different reasons. You know, some like slashers, some like zombie films, etc. And what draws me to horror is things like we talked about the Lovecraft R.H. Barlow short story, The Night Ocean, which I've mentioned many times on this show. And reason why I love it is it just hints that there's something behind the curtain. There's something in the foundations of reality that the protagonist gets a glimpse of darkly, as Paul the Apostle said, through a glass darkly, but never really understands. And that might sound frustrating as a description, but when you read it, you're just filled with this sense of wonder. At least I was. Are there any other authors or stories that you would recommend that are similar to that hint to this? And failing that, are there any authors working today that, I'm sure you have many favorites, but do you have favorites that you think aren't read enough that you'd like to shout out to?
On the classic end of things, of course, I recommend Lovecraft. And I myself was pretty deeply marked by some of the standard names you would expect to hear in response to a question. When someone mentions Lovecraft, like Arthur Machen, Algernon Blackwood. I haven't read much Hodgson, William Hope Hodgson, but The House on the Borderland knocked me for a loop. And
Yeah.
I mean, some of the names that formed what emerged as like the core canon from the 19th and the early 20th century, first half of the 20th century, those have been influential for me. I always hesitate to name contemporary authors because you know, I feel like I'm going to leave somebody out that I meant to mention, and not because not because I think they're my friends. I mean, I know many of them from conventions and online conversations, but just because afterwards I think, oh, I really meant to name somebody, you know.
Yeah, understandable.
But as far as this edge of reality type thing, I do feel like, well, we talked about John's The Secret of Ventriloquism. He has not just written that, he's got several other things that he's written, and those are really good for for rattling a person's cage. I mean, a lot of people have commented on just how deeply they were impacted by his writing, because it's almost like it stair steps you into this place where you
It does. Good.
Reach this new sense
Good way
of
to put it.
self-awareness that's not entirely comfortable. So there's a real power going on there.
I can't recommend that book enough. And another encouraging thing before you continue, John's a friend, and I said to John, what brilliant writing it was. And the encouraging thing that he said to me, this applies to writers, this applies to any creator, is, forgive me, John, I'm a badly paraphrase, it's been a couple of years, but he said, I went through dozens and dozens and dozens of revisions. You know, another writer said, thank God that the public sees only the final draft. The reason why it was encouraging me, because it was so brilliant, and that you achieve that as a creator by writing that first draft and then improving on it, throwing out the chaff, keeping the gems, and repeating that, getting feedback from someone you respect and taking that advice to heart and making those changes. And it may take a long time, and then you have this beautiful finished project like The Secret of Ventriloquism. So it was a very encouraging thing to me that I think any creator, and maybe especially writers, would be encouraged by. But anyway, yeah, Secret of Ventriloquism. Yeah,
I agree. And the interesting thing about like one of the main stories in that is a backbone story to it. You're talking about the dozens and dozens or scores and scores of drafts. Is if you had read the earliest version, which is like, you know, a decade and a half before the book came out, or longer than that, which I did, you wouldn't even recognize it. It's like, that's not the same story at all. It's not the same story.
right.
But it was in its essence. It was like a spiritual thing that wanted to come out with a different story, but it was the same thing that was originally trying to manifest itself. It's very, very interesting, like you said.
John's
Find
watching,
its
like
way
I
out
said,
over
he
that
says,
long.
yes, it took almost 20 years just to write the first story and years later to get the book out. My spouse still says I released it too soon. So it, yeah. If anybody listening to this episode, please read To Rouse Leviathan. It's amazing. It really is. And look forward to your upcoming, God, why do I keep blanking on that name? I know the word demons in there. I'm sorry.
Demon said.
What the Demons Said. Yeah, coming up from Hippocampus Press sometime in this spring, it sounds like. Secret of Ventriloquism. Along this, like you said, this edge, this, what we're talking about, is there anybody else you want to recommend? And it's sort of putting you on the spot, but
Yeah, I like it. There would be many, and but I don't read a whole lot of my ability to read and appreciate fiction has gone into abeyance as well. I read more nonfiction, and I read very slowly. I don't read much. I read very selectively, and it's almost all spiritually oriented to things lately. So that's actually where I've gone, and I've sort of, both involuntarily and then with some deliberate edging of it along, I have become a lot more one-pointed in my focus on that, because I'm 51 years old, and I'm not getting any younger, and now is now, and now is always now. But with this life that I'm living right now is rapidly evolving, it seems like, and certain things have asserted themselves more to the fore in recent years, like what's actually important. I see less value in the efforts that I would put into reading certain things, even things that I like, and writing certain things that I formerly would have felt driven to write. So I'm not going to name any more authors because I would leave somebody out. And also because I know there's a lot of stuff being produced right now that's changing the field too, and who writes in the field, and who should have always been allowed to write in the field. And, and I'm not going to say something because I would leave someone out, and also because I've to some extent stepped out of the game and have my focus turned in another way.
I think I say on almost every episode of this show, you're younger than you. I'm 50, and I am constantly aware that there's a limited number of hours left in my life. So, I want to spend them wisely and focus, like you said, on what's important to me. And what's important is different to everyone. But I'll throw out a couple names. Just if you like To Rouse Leviathan, if you like, speaking to the audience, Secret of Ventriloquism, Max D. Stanton's book, A Season of Loathsome Miracles, has some really, really different ideas in it. And I'll stop there. There's more. Emma J. Gibbon wrote a book recently. I said I'd stop there, and then I'm going to say one more. Dark Blood Comes from the Feet. That's a really good one too. So, and a great title. John, anyone else? Anything else we want to comment on or talk to Matt about before we let him go?
Yeah, I would. One of the things that strikes me, and I don't know, Matt reminds me. I'm going to talk about you, Matt, as if you're not here. Of Richard Gavin to some extent, and I don't know that their concerns are exactly the same. But there may be parallel in a sense, And I think what fascinates me is, to see these two writers who have these kind of philosophical or religious philosophical interests, and they're sort of running on one track, and they're both related, I think, to an interest in the numinous and how the numinous works or doesn't work, or how it's experienced. And then so parallel to that, then you've also got this fiction, that this body of fiction that they've been working on, and I have the sense that yeah, Paget and also Matt Bartlett are kind of in the same neck of the woods, except that, you know, Bartlett, and this is no harm to Bartlett, but just I haven't seen him doing as much on the nonfiction side of things. And I think probably, and I'm aware that this is like a very, you know, white male kind of group. So that just speaks to my own, you know, the limitations of my own reading. But it's, you know, think about like Ramsey Campbell on some level. Ramsey fits into this in a really weird kind of way that I don't completely understand. I haven't really thought about, but in terms of that interest in the sort of borders of reality, the permeability of things, I think Campbell's focus, you know, he picks up from Lovecraft a lot of that sense of the cosmic, right? I think Ramsey, there's also something about language and psychology that Ramsey does, and these kind of really interesting and fundamentally his own kinds of ways that are part of this discussion as well. In a it's like a sort of fuzzy set, you know. I'm sort of thinking about, well, who are these different writers that seemed like they could all be kind of put together? I mean, Michael Sisko orbits this conversation like some kind of weird dark planet, you know.
Very good point. Yeah.
I take all of those comparisons, every single one of them, very kindly. Thank you, John.
Oh, you know, I hate all those guys, so I just, you know.
Oh, okay.
Especially
Yeah,
Cisco.
especially Cisco.
Thank you for the clarification. I would have left with the wrong impression.
I know, right?
I asked Matt if he'd seen the show when, you know, before we started. And he goes, "Yeah, I saw that one episode, that clip with Cisco channeling
Werner Herzog,
yeah, Herzog."
German director, yes.
And this was just completely, none of this was planned. John just like, so Michael Sisko, what if Herzog was eating a fish dinner and he didn't like, something to that effect? And Cisco's like, are you serious?
He was like, my life is an exercise in empty show already. Why not?
There will be 47 bullets in you, and at least one of them will be mine.
I laughed aloud.
You know, we need to get a picture. We need to get a t-shirt. It just occurred to me now. We need to have a t-shirt with Cisco's face on it, but underneath it says Werner Herzog.
That's a good idea. And, you know, just to the audience, and just to put an enormous amount of pressure on John Langan, which I love to do, I have asked Cisco and Langan about a, you know, we could do like a 10, it doesn't have to be an hour, a 10-minute, you know, dialogue or argument between German Godzilla and Cisco Herzog, you know, and they both have agreed in theory. And then when I reply like, okay, when, they ignore me. So I just want all you millions of people watching to know that I'm trying to make this happen.
The funny thing is, like, I'm tempted to say, well, if you can get like 1,000 people but I know that 1,000 people just out of sheer perversity would agree to this, would say, no, we want to do this. So I feel I need to set some insane number. You know
what? I should.
I have one answer for you, John. Bodie McBoatface.
You know what?
That was the name that won.
I'm gonna pick it. I'm gonna pick a charity, and no, it won't be me. And if you guys do this, then people have to give so much to the charity. We'll figure this out.
Well, yeah, people were, I suppose that's true. If you could find a worthy charity and people were to donate a certain amount of money to that charity, then yeah, Cisco.
Yeah, if we reach out, say $1,000 on something dear to your heart, John, like cats, a cat charity.
I do like cats. I do like cats a lot. Cats or dogs. Yeah, that would be. So let's Cisco and I we'll put our heads together and we'll see.
Larry would help us promote it if we include. Yeah, if we do cats and dogs, Larry would help us promote it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So
okay,
let's do it. Matt, you're a witness. So anyway, you're all witnesses.
I saw nothing.
Thank you, Sergeant Schultz.
I guess the last twist I have for this before I let you go, Matt, is you know, the other twist to this is, I'm sure you're familiar with simulation, the simulation argument by Nick Bostrom. It just seems to me the flip side of the coin of what is reality. You know, we don't know, and we can't empirically prove it either way.
Empirical proof is not the point. Like I said,
Yeah.
there's a certain flip in perspective that happens when you realize that's absolutely true. You can't empirically prove anything. That's because you can't step outside. You are ensconced in your own first personhood. There's a philosopher named Douglas Harding, philosophy of headlessness, that he came up with. I recommend checking out. He was pretty popular in the 70s, you know, and like the simulation argument, it's fine. It's kind of like everything that's happening to us is just experience. You know, even your own thoughts are just experience, not just sensory perceptions, right? Your thoughts, everything about your personality, you are aware of it, you're experiencing it, so you're not it. So
Well, whether I'm flesh
simulation,
and
but we're
blown,
watching it, you know?
yeah, whether I'm flesh and bone or I'm part of a computer program, I'm still a thinking being.
Sure.
Whatever
Who's
I'm
watching
made of.
If it's a simulation, there's someone watching it. You are that person, or you are that whatever it is. So that's kind of where I want to dig in.
Well, if I sent you a short story written by Amy Cross from Strange Little Horrors in an email. I know your fiction, you're real focused on not reading a lot of fiction right now, as you said, but that's probably about a 15-minute read, and I'd love to know what you think of that after you're finished with it. You know, whenever you can get to it. So no rush.
Well,
So,
thank you, Mike.
Yeah. Anyway, Matt, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate talking with you. So
Thanks. Appreciate all of you too.
So, yeah. For the audience, check out To Rouse Leviathan, and What the Demon Said is coming out from Hippocampus later this year. To Rouse Leviathan is I would say fair to say most of your fiction, and What the Demon Said is that most of your nonfiction so far.
Yes.
Okay, so even if you just have those two books, you're going to be in good shape to explore you know, the mind of Matt Cardin is fiction and nonfiction. So do that. And Hippocampus is doing a good thing by getting this out there. So kudos to them. So anyway, Matt, thanks for being here. We're going to talk about a couple more horror related things because we're all dorks before we go. You're welcome to stay, or you're welcome to leave and get on with the rest of your Sunday, whatever you want to do. So
I'm going to hang because I'm a geek at heart too.
all right, then let us and thanks again. It's been great meeting you and talking with you. Speaking of Legati, Songs of a Dead Dreamer and Grimscribe on Kindle is presently only $1.99, at least in America. So if you don't have that and you're a Kindle person, pick it up. I don't know if that's just today or if that's going to last for several days or what, but this is the 9th of January, 2022. If you're listening to this 3 years later, it might not apply, but buy the book anyway, because it's a great book. There is a series, you guys probably saw me post about this, Matt and Pete, DeBronzo, maybe John, I don't know if Rick did. Fieria, The Darkest Light is a Netflix series coming on January the 28th.
And is it Spanish or Mexican?
It's somewhere in Spain.
Okay.
Subtitled, obviously. The trailer is available on YouTube, and it starts off. This isn't a spoiler because it's on the trailer. These two teenage, by the way, it's set in the mid-90s, I believe, and these two girls got these what they think normal parents, and then the local authorities discover, like, I don't know, 30 bodies in this cave or something, and it's pointed at their parents who have disappeared, I guess, that they're probably the ones who did it, that they're probably part of a cult, And it just, as you watch the trailer, it just gets creepier and creepier. And my first thought was, if the series really is like this, you know, we've been disappointed before, but if the series is really like this, then this is cosmic horror, Lovecraftian horror, whatever, done right. This looks really, really good. So I try to limit my TV and movies. I got too much to read, but I'm really looking forward to this. And that's January the 28th. The other one that looks good is there's a podcast, a fiction podcast called Archive 81. Are any of you familiar with this? No? All right. Well, I was going to have one of you explain it. Now I got to do it myself. Wow. Really, Pete? All right. So it,
I don't do other podcasts. My time is spent prepping for this one.
I'm sorry. I know I make your life hell. Forgive me. Anyway, it's got, short version is it's got Lovecraftian vibes. It's a very good fictional podcast. I really don't want to say too much about it. And it's now going to be a series on, again, Netflix, and that comes out, let's see here. I think it's the 14th. I think it's coming right up. I think it's this coming Friday. So I'm looking forward to that as well.
I just want to say
Yes,
that
sir.
right now I would like to see like a sort of a training montage of Pete getting ready for the Lovecraft Easing each week.
Yeah,
You know, he's like,
right.
he's like watching old episodes. He's like writing down possible things he might say.
There's sticky notes everywhere. We
right,
get like
exactly. He's
you know.
he's trying different camera angles, you know.
I used to do that, but you know, I used to prep.
But he doesn't take it seriously anymore.
He used to care.
I used to care. No, what happened was that I had this whole, I can't remember who it was, but I had this whole theory of their fiction, and I wrote it out all down on notes cards and everything. And I presented the first fundamental concept to the writer, and they're like, no, you're completely wrong. And I'm like, just forget.
Oh yeah, I remember that. That was that one turn left or whatever it was.
Yeah,
the left right podcast. So Pete had all these theories for, you know, names and locations that the author came up with. Jack was his name, right?
Yeah, stuff like that.
It's going to be a movie or series or something. And so we had him on, and Pete's pitching all his theories, Matt, and the guy's like, "No, wasn't thinking about that at all." Pete's just like, "Fuck."
on the other hand, maybe you had really nailed it, and he was like, "Oh my God," and he just had to deny everything.
Right. No.
Or if in future interviews, he's like, "Yeah, this is what I was thinking when I did this name and everything," and it's all coming from Pete Rawley.
Yeah, I just reminded of like I was at Miami Book Fair once, and there was these the guys who write Cliff Notes and Spark Notes. They were up there and they were talking about, and Amy Tan was a guest at the Miami Book Fair, and they were talking about how they had done the Cliff Notes for her books and all the symbolism and stuff that was in the Kitchen's God's Wife and whatnot, and they were specifically talking about the symbolism of the blue curtains in her mother's in the lead character's mother's kitchen. And it's like, well, that's interesting, because, and you know, somebody stands up in the back. It's like, no, it's not. The curtains in my mother's kitchen are blue. And just, you know, so yeah.
Well, do you remember there's an episode of The Simpsons where Lisa's at a book fair and Amy Tan, it was, you know, and is one of the guests, and Lisa stands up and gives this eloquent interpretation of the Joy Luck Club, which is pretty much on target. And then Amy Tan is like, that's not it. That's not it at all.
Yeah. 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 I think this happened before that episode. So I think it was borrowed from a real life event.
So Pete's bitter now, and he just sort of flies by the seat of his pants.
I just drink and make pontifications.
Well, you're doing good. Some more series coming up, not on necessarily Netflix. This one's on Epix, and it's called From. I just posted a link to an article about it and several others in the. I don't know if I made it to the Facebook comments, but I did the YouTube comments. But anyway, it's at Bloody Disgusting, and I watched the trailer and it looks really good. It follows a nightmarish town, I'm quoting now, in middle America that traps all those passing through. As the unwilling residents fight to keep a sense of normalcy and search for a way out, they must also survive the threats of the surrounding forest.
That actually looks pretty good. I've seen the trailer.
Does. Yeah. And then I've got high hopes for this. Interview with the Vampire, late 2022 on AMC. Not that I'm not sick of vampires, I am, but I do like Anne Rice vampires.
I had missed that was actually happening. That's something. Okay, I'm excited about that.
Yeah,
They're
me
also
too.
doing the Mayfair Witches too, I think.
That's right. Yeah.
So
And then on Netflix again, you're rocking Netflix. Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities, to be determined, date on Netflix. Del Toro has curated quite an impressive lineup for this live action anthology series arriving on Netflix sometime this year. Episode directors for the series will include Panos Cosmatos, directed Mandy, I guess, Jennifer Kent, The Babadook, Vincenzo Natali, Splice, and David Pryor, The Empty Man. Wonderful movie. I hope I can get him on the show. David Pryor, I mean. The cast is just as impressive with, wait for it, a couple of stories set to adapt H.P. Lovecraft. Not too surprising coming from Del Toro, but still nice to read. The Sandman is coming. I don't know. I'm ambivalent.
You shouldn't be. Everything I'm reading and seeing is really looking good.
I think there was a teaser trailer, and the look was just superb.
Oh, good.
I mean, so far as the graphic novel art from, when did it come out originally? The 90s?
Earlier than that, but yeah, go ahead.
But it looked, the Sandman dream himself looked like how he looks on the printed page. So I thought I was really kind of excited.
And then Mike Flanagan and Trevor Macy, based on the creative works of best-selling author Christopher Pike, who I will always have a soft spot for, including the same titled The Midnight Club. The young adult book saw a group of terminally ill young adults gather each night at midnight in their hospice to tell scary stories.
Mm-hmm.
Expect Flanagan to remix the novel with multiple Pike works. Heather Langenkamp stars as the enigmatic doctor in charge. Isn't she
That's
dead?
good.
Isn't she dead?
Nightmare on Elm Street, isn't it?
Didn't
Yeah,
she die?
she was the lead on Nightmare on Elm Street. She didn't die.
Okay. All right. And actually I talked to Flanagan, and he's conditionally told me that he'll come on in the summer sometime. He said he's working on a project that he didn't say, I didn't ask, this might be it. That he needs to finish first, but he mentioned August possibly. So that'd be really nice. I love Bly Manor, as everybody knows. So, and Absentia. So anyway, there's that. What else do we got? Oh, anybody watch Ghostbusters yet?
Nope, it's on my list.
Yeah, it's $20. I'm gonna wait for the price to come down.
So just the series that you mentioned, I got to say, about once or twice a year on Easy Movie Night, we'll watch a series. It usually has to be completely dropped, so we can do 2 episodes a week and see it over 3 to 4 weeks. We're talking about picking a series for the next couple of nights, movie nights, and some of the ones you mentioned made it on there. We can't, of course, do any of these new ones that are just coming out. So if you're interested in seeing some of these series, eventually we will get to them on movie night.
I was disappointed last night. I barely ever go to the theater, and I thought for some reason that Scream was out. And I was like, oh, this is great. I'm going to go to the late show. And then I find out it doesn't come out to the 14th, which I think is this Friday.
It's got good buzz.
Yeah, it's getting really good early reviews. So that's good.
Is anybody else watching Station 11?
No, it's very good.
Never
Have you
heard
been
of it.
watching it?
I have. I'm a couple episodes behind, but I am enjoying it. I can only tolerate it in small doses.
What is it?
Station 11 is a series. It's on HBO Max. It's post-apocalyptic. Most of the world has been wiped out by the flu. And it's set in, I think it's set around Lake Superior. And the focus is the Traveling Symphony, which is a caravan of Shakespearean actors. And they're trying to get through, post-apocalyptic America by being Shakespearean actors.
Oh, well, that'll
But-
be pretty nice. It's like there are any number of stories and stuff about traveling caravans, from medieval times on.
Right. The thing is that there's one of the protagonists and the antagonist both were exposed to a comic book that was written by an adult in their life, and they read it before it was released, and of course because of the plague it was never released. But now that comic book is having a huge influence on the apocalypse, on the survivors.
So what you're saying is, if I would like a break from the reality of COVID,
Yeah.
then I should watch this post-apocalyptic series about.
Yeah, no, and this is one of the reasons I have to take it in small doses,
Yeah,
because it's hitting a little close to home.
yeah,
But it's well done because it flashes backwards and forwards through what happened prior to the pandemic, during the pandemic, and what happened to those people after the pandemic, which is an interesting storytelling tool, which I'm really enjoying. And anyway, it's not bad.
right. Have you guys seen a movie called Son? It's on Shudder. SON.
No.
This woman, I'm about a third of the way through it, and it's pretty bone chilling so far. This woman escapes from a cult when she's pregnant, and then she raises her son, and then I'm not sure what's going on next, if the cult is after her to get her son, but there's definitely supernatural elements to this, not just it's a weird one. Kevin Wilson says Son is pretty good. Ralph Grasso says, has any guest here seen Antlers? Not a guest, but I've seen Antlers.
I've seen Antlers.
I've seen Antlers.
Don't go to the shed. It's my advice.
Yeah, don't.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I know what you guys think about it, but for everybody else, what would be your opinion on Antlers? Would you recommend it to somebody? Yay or nay?
I think that Antlers has some very interesting and well played scenes and concepts, but as a whole, it's poorly paced.
Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead.
There's a better story in that movie. It's just doesn't come out. I mean,
and they do
sorry,
really
go
well
ahead.
with that atmospheric, depressing town where people are losing their jobs and so forth. But that's the first two acts.
2/3 of the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's if you got. I don't want to give any spoilers away in case you do want to watch it. It's like what goes on in the third act where it really kind of hits its stride is there should have been more of that in the second act. Should have started earlier, and it's just unbalanced.
You know, it's not
And
quite the same, but you know what it reminds me of? The New Daughter, which is better paced.
I still haven't seen that yet.
No, you have to see the new daughter.
Oh yeah, you have to see the New Daughter.
I have it on my watch list, and I still haven't gotten to it.
Yeah, move it up on to the top.
I will
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. All right. Anything else, guys? What's
Yes.
everybody reading and watching?
I got something to mention.
Yes.
It recently reprinted. It's available on Kindle, which is Tierney's Drums of Chaos, which hooks in directly to the Dunwich horror crucifixion analogy.
That book was originally printed by Mythos Books.
Yep.
It went out of print almost as soon as it was released. And now Bob Price kind of has his own publishing house. I think it's Exham Priory, which is basically all POD. I think that is where that reprint is coming from.
I think it's coming from who did the Simon of Gita omnibus on it.
Yeah, it is. I've actually talked to him on email. I forget his name. Sorry, but I think that Bob Price was somehow involved in revamping his introduction.
Yeah.
There's
It would kind of
something-
fit right up Bob Price's alley, actually. And I don't think anybody else could introduce this book, because you may have read the Simon of Gitta stories. You can do that if you're an assiduous collector. But getting the John Taggart stories, that's hard. And you can't really understand what's going on unless you understand Tierney's dynamic, which is there are these creatures called the primal ones. They seeded the universe with life, not because they're benign, but because they eat suffering. And so this is Tierney's philosophy, or philosophy is not wrong, his cosmology here. Every so often, if the universe population gets high, they have this revelation through the phantom of truth that the reality is you're all worms, and it precipitates a great dying and a great amount of suffering. So now opposing to them are Cthulhu and its ilk. They're like the elder gods or something like that. And they sort of oppose this great dying, not because they care about humanity, but because they don't want the primal ones to have a food source.
The primal ones are the elder gods.
Yeah. So the elder gods, the
From
primal
Donuts.
ones. What's that?
Donuts is elder gods turn on their head.
Right. So what they want to do is, it's not that they care about humanity. They're opposing this denouement because they want their competitors to be at a disadvantage. So we're just basically something in the way, as it were. It's a beautifully written book in terms of the amount of research that he did and the cosmology and all that. I was just absolutely, I thought it was breathtaking. The problem is Tierney's prose is only fair, so there's a lot of info dump type dialogue, Deus Ex Machina, people running back and forth to tell people other things. But I would, if you like Lovecraftian type cosmic horror, you really need to read this, because it was an astonishing achievement, I thought.
That's why I wish that book that I talk about so often, that I read as a 15 or 16-year-old, The Displaced Person by Lee Harding, published in 1978. I wish there was a way to make it more widely available. There's a phrase I posted the other day, if Facebook will cooperate. Let's see here. It's being slow. Where he talks about, I think that we are somebody else's property. And Matt Cardin, it's a book that I think that you would really enjoy if you had time to read it. It's about this kid who he's 17 and he starts to slowly realize that people aren't noticing him anymore. And he eventually ends up in this gray world among other forgotten people. Yeah, I found it. In these last moments before I am engulfed by the cold and the darkness and the presence, I see that Marion was right. I think we are someone's property. I think we are manipulated and pushed around by forces that we are too puny to understand, like cattle or specimens on a slide. I find that I can no longer believe in such things as free will and personal motivation. We are all pawns in a game so vast, we will never be able to confront the forces that control our destinies, any more than the tiny creatures in a rock pool can comprehend man or the tides that govern their lives. So I read this, it was published in 78, and I probably read this in 80 or so, you know, when I was 9 or 10. And, you know, years later, looking back, I realized this is the first cosmic horror book I ever read. It wasn't billed that way. It was just billed as a, you know, a strange sci-fi young adult novel. And I've read it several times as an adult, and it definitely, you don't have to be a young adult to read it. So yeah, it's really good. If you can, there are still some on Amazon, but they're insanely high priced. But anyone out there listening, if you can afford to get a copy of it's either it's either titled Displaced Person or Misplaced Person by Lee Harding, and that's not my memory. That's two different titles of the book with two different publications.
Okay, if we want to go old fashioned, I'm willing to bet there are libraries out there that have copies, and you could just
True.
check with your interlibrary loan. Maybe you could just get it without paying.
That's a really good point. Yeah. So anyway, Matt Cardin, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed speaking with you. Prize, Matt.
Yes, so remember, if you want this really nice collection by Adam Bolivar, prominent young poet, it's called The Ettenfell of Beacon Hill, Gothic Stories of Boston. Just send an email to easinprizes@gmail.com and put Boston in the subject heading. We usually draw a winner in 5 to 6 weeks from the air date.
Someone just said, excellent interview. Can't wait to read his stuff. Love you guys. But I think they're talking about you, Pete. No. Oh, no, they're talking about Matt Cardin. When they say love you guys, I think they're talking about Langan. So they're like, finally, he showed up.
You
My
know,
mom,
you got it. I mean, you know, I'm sorry.
you know, I don't want to put any pressure on you, but I do. But my mom's been very worried about you. You know, like every 2 weeks, she's like, why is John Langan not on? Is he sick? Is he okay? And I'm like, I'm sure he's fine. He probably just has more important things to do, you know, like write books or something.
Well, if only that were true.
All right, Matt Cardin, all kidding aside, thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed talking with us as much as we enjoyed talking with you.
And all the rest of you. Thank you for the conversation. Thanks
Thank
for showing
you.
up, John.
Thank you.
Finally. Again, last thing I want to say is to remind the audience to Rouse Leviathan by Matt Cardin, and What the Demon Said is upcoming from Hippocampus Press as well. Those two books are a great way to start. So anyway, thanks everybody. And I think we are out of here. Thanks to my son, Logan, for doing all the tech. Let me know when we're out, Logan. Sorry, this is our first time doing it this way, folks. So you'll have to bear with my